I think it's safe to say at this point that Naughty Dog is a legendary studio responsible for some of the best games of certain generations like Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, Uncharted, and of course, The Last of Us. All these games were amazing and sold really well and even changed the course of the gaming industry somewhat. The first Last of Us was a really good game, and I made a whole video about it, and you should go check it out, because it'll give you some more context for what's about to happen next. Now, I'm one of the many people who believe that The Last of Us didn't really need a sequel, but I was always open to the idea if it was done correctly. However, the sequel we got was a miserable mess masquerading as a AAA title. Now, don't get me wrong, The Last of Us Part 2 is probably one of, if not the best looking game on the PlayStation 4, but beautiful and detailed graphics do not make up for incoherent, sloppy storytelling. Now, before we get into everything wrong with the game, I want to highlight the things that I actually really liked about this game. Now, I don't hate this game. Like I said before, this game looks absolutely stunning, whether it be the ruins of Seattle or the rural settlement of Jackson, not to mention the crazy amount of accessibility settings this game has, which makes it probably the most accessible game on the PlayStation 4. Plus, the character models have a crazy amount of detail on them. The facial expressions on every character are complex and do an amazing job of conveying emotions, which only adds to the already stellar performances. The gameplay is honestly a bit stale, but the addition of going prone helps to spice it up a bit. The attention to detail is amazing as well, like when you upgrade a weapon at a workbench, you actually see Ellie or Abby making the modification to the weapon, which blew me away. The human enemies call out to each other during gunfights, react to their friends' deaths, and even coordinate with each other to box you in. I actually really enjoyed Lev's character and story, since he's trans and is being hunted by his ex-religious group known as the Seraphites. But his story isn't really explored as much as I hoped it would be. Like, just the basis of his character is enough for a compelling story on its own, but besides that, I loved Ellie and Dina's relationship for the short time the game allowed me to. Honestly, Abby's sections were also pretty enjoyable too, but the real highlight of the game for me was the flashbacks with Joel and Ellie, because they were the happiest parts of the game, but they were over too fast. Okay, that was basically everything I liked about the game. Now we get to everything that I didn't like.
Please stop! Please don't shoot!
Now, everything I'm about to say is my opinion. Whoa, I know, I used a scary word, but trust me, I'm gonna try to be as impersonable as possible. Now, all my problems with this story lie squarely with the decisions made by Naughty Dog, the story itself, and the way the story is structured. Now, Neil Druckmann himself has even been quoted saying before the game launched that he knew it would divide the fan base, and that fans of the first game would most likely not enjoy Part 2. This just baffles me because as a creator, why would I ever purposefully divide my fan base? That whole fiasco in itself is bad enough, if it weren't for the fact that Naughty Dog faked out fans by using Joel's new design in the trailers in scenes that either turned out to be flashbacks with younger Joel, or scenes where Joel was replaced with a different character entirely.
What the hell are you doing here?
You think I'd let you do this on your own?
What the hell are you doing here?
I think I'd let you do this on your own.
Now, I can somewhat forgive this because Naughty Dog just didn't want to spoil the game in trailers, and I get that if it weren't for the fact that major parts of the story were leaked a couple months prior to the game's release. Oops. The leaks divided fans almost immediately as they revealed some of the lies from the trailers. I would love to show you these leaks if Sony and Naughty Dog hadn't abused the copyright system to nuke almost all traces of the leaks from most platforms. The game wasn't even out yet, and there was already controversy. Now, I'll admit, I didn't play the game when it came out because of all the controversy, and I didn't really watch any YouTubers or streamers play it either. So, when I decided to make this video after making a video on the first Last of Us, I bought a physical copy of Part 2 for $20, and decided to give the game a fair chance despite the popular opinion. And I didn't hate it. Don't get me wrong, I didn't enjoy it overall, but maybe that's because I'm a fan of the first game. Isn't that right, Neil? The biggest problem with this game isn't poorly written characters or the main characters being a gay woman and She-Hulk. No, the main problem is the story itself. The Last of Us Part 2 is framed as a revenge story, and there is nothing wrong with that. There are plenty of examples of good revenge stories, like Ghost of Tsushima. The problem lies with how this revenge story is presented, and The Last of Us Part 2 is confusing, to say the least. Now, before I get into the problems I had with the story, let me just tackle the elephant in the room, and that's Joel and his death. I'll admit I don't necessarily have a problem with Joel dying in this game. I mean, he's an old man who wronged a lot of dangerous people throughout his life, and it was only a matter of time before consequences of his actions caught up with him. However, I do have a problem with how he dies in this game. How, and specifically when, because Joel dies within the first 2 hours of the game. Not only does he die very early into this 30-hour game, he goes out with very little to no fight. He gets his knee blown out with a shotgun and is beaten to death with a golf club. It's just sad. I mean, I would have loved it if he had at least gone out defending Ellie or Tommy, but instead we get Abby beating him to death and Manny spitting on his corpse in front of Ellie. Joel was completely out of character in this entire sequence. This was not the same grizzled old survivor who trusted a select few people. Alright, this Joel just casually tells a group of armed strangers his name with zero suspicion or hesitation, and it gets him killed. Now, I'm sure someone will argue that Joel became more trusting over the last 4 years in Jackson, and to that, I say bullshit. 4 years does not override 20 years of survival instincts. Anyway, Joel dying is what sparks Ellie's quest for revenge, and it's fine as the game proceeds to show more of Ellie and Dina's relationship and their couple banter. I'm just gonna say this now, Dina is like the best girlfriend ever. Like, Joel dies and Ellie wants to go after Abby and her friends, and Dina is so chill about it, and she's like, yeah, let's go get them. And that brings me to my next point. Exactly who are the main characters of this game? Because the next 8 hours of gameplay lead you to believe that Ellie and Dina are going to be the dynamic duo of the game, and I was all for that. The opening section of Seattle is a semi-open world level with lots of places to explore and find items. This section was great because Dina and Ellie's couple banter once again is great, but then she gets benched because she's pregnant, and leaves Ellie to do all these horrible things on her own, which is stupid. Mind you, Tommy has already killed like 2 of Abby's friends by this point, and Ellie has killed like 3 of them in cutscenes, so that you as the player don't even get to do it yourself. After Ellie kills Nora in the hospital, Jesse, Dina's ex-boyfriend, shows up, and I thought he would be Ellie's second, you know, someone for her to banter with, to add a bit of levity to the dark story. And he does. For like 2 hours, before he decides to go look for Tommy while Ellie goes off on her own, again, to find Abby at the aquarium. Not very smart, because Ellie doesn't know if Abby's alone, but okay. So Ellie gets to the aquarium, and you immediately are forced to stab a dog in a quick-time event. Off to a great start. But hey, this feels like the game is building to a climax. Ellie finds and kills Owen and Mel, two more of Abby's friends, and it turns out that Mel was pregnant, and Ellie rightfully freaks out that she killed a pregnant woman as Jesse and Tommy arrive to take her back to the theater they're camping out in. And just as it seems like the game is going to come to an anticlimactic end with Abby getting to live and the group going back to Jackson for the sake of Dina's health, Abby shows up at the theater because Ellie dropped her map in panic, and neither Tommy nor Jesse noticed this. So Jesse immediately gets shot, and Abby has Tommy on the ground, and just as the tension builds and you feel like it's time for the fateful encounter, the game then cuts to a flashback from Abby's perspective. Buckle up, because this is where it goes off the rails. Up until this point, the story has been following a basic narrative structure: an exposition, an inciting incident, which is either Joel killing Abby's father or Abby killing Joel. Take your pick, because the game doesn't definitively choose one. Then, the game has a pretty solid rising action in the opening Seattle section, followed by the weather station and the hospital, where the tension builds until the presumed climax at the theater. But instead, the game cuts to a flashback from Abby's perspective, which de-escalates all of the tension that was built up over the last 8 hours of gameplay. The game then proceeds to subvert your expectations by trying desperately to frame Abby as a good person for the next 10 hours. Seriously, this whole section can be boiled down to, look, Joel killed her dad, so she killed him. See, Abby's friends aren't bad people. They have friends and family too, and we're just helping their friend get closure. Meanwhile, it frames everything Ellie is doing as fucking war crimes. Ellie gets reframed as the villain of Abby's story, and I know there's the whole, you're the hero of one story is the villain of another, and yeah, that would have been okay if Druckmann and the writing team didn't make it personal. Let me explain by going off on a tangent real quick.
See, there's a sequel. Wasn't as good.
The story of the first game worked as well as it did because it was about Joel, Ellie, and their developing relationship. There was no clear-cut main villain of the first game. Sure, it had its fair share of antagonists, like Fedra, the truck in Detroit, and of course David and his cannibals, as opposed to part 2, where Abby and her friends are framed as the villains from the very beginning of the story, and the beef is personal for both Ellie and the player due to their attachment to Joel. So, for the game to swap perspectives so abruptly and change the way every important character is framed just causes tonal whiplash, and was rightfully rejected by a majority of the player base. But then, after finishing Abby's flashbacks, the player is then forced to play as Abby as she fights Ellie. The player literally has to beat the shit out of the protagonist of the story and leaves her laying in a pool of her own blood and vomit. Oh, and Abby nearly kills Dina, who, may I remind you, is pregnant. And when Abby is told this, she just says, "Good," before Lev stops her. This is where the game lost my interest completely, and I just mentally checked out. So, Abby leaves Dina and Ellie alive, and Tommy survives getting shot in the head somehow, and they go back to Jackson. The game then skips forward again about a year later, and we see that Ellie and Dina are living happily together in a farmhouse outside of Jackson while raising their son. And you know what? This little section of happiness would have been a good ending. Sure, Abby got away and Jesse died, but at least Ellie was able to come to terms with her trauma of Joel's death and was able to let Abby go and is now living happily.
Come on, little guy. Do you want to eat? It's okay. You're home. You're home. Breathe, breathe. Okay. I'm gonna take him, okay?
Oh, Christ. So, with literally zero mention of this before, it's revealed that Ellie has PTSD from the trauma of Joel's death. And once again, this would have been fine if it had been properly introduced 20 hours ago. So after that incident, Tommy, who now has brain damage and a limp, shows up to tell Ellie that he has managed to find out that Abby is in Santa Barbara and urges Ellie to finish what she started. So, I have mixed feelings about this scene. Firstly, Ellie actually does the responsible thing and turns Tommy down because now she has a family and is relatively happy. Second, Tommy berates Ellie with insults, calling her a coward for not going after Abby again, which is completely out of character for him, by the way, but whatever. Dina, being the amazing partner she is, backs Ellie's decision to let Abby go, causing Tommy to storm off like an angry child. So then, like a day later, Ellie decides to go back on her decision and leave in the middle of the night to go after Abby, and is confronted by Dina in what is honestly a well-performed, heartbreaking scene.
Hey. Man, it's been a while since he slept this long, huh?
He had a day.
Yeah. He's fine. Go back to bed. We'll talk about it in the morning, okay?
I have to finish it.
You don't owe Tommy anything.
I don't sleep. I don't eat. I'm not like you, Dina.
What? You think this is easy? For you and for him, I deal with it.
I love you.
Prove it. Stay.
I can't.
So what? I'm just supposed to sit here and wait for you? For God knows how long, just thinking you're fucking dead the entire time?
I don't plan on dying.
Yeah, well, neither did Jesse. Or Joel. Hey, stop. Hey, come on. We've got a family. She doesn't get to be more important than that. No. I'm not gonna do this again.
That's up to you.
So Ellie has learned nothing and given up everything in the pursuit of vengeance. And once she gets to Santa Barbara, Ellie finds out that Abby and Lev were captured by a group called the Rattlers about 6 months ago. So Ellie breaks into the Rattlers' camp, frees the prisoners, starts a mutiny, and the prisoners tell her that Abby and Lev were caught trying to escape and put on the spires down by the beach. Ellie finds Abby, who is malnourished and close to death, and cuts her down. Abby then cuts Lev down and leads Abby to a pair of boats. Just as it seems that Ellie is finally going to let Abby go for good, Ellie shoves Abby to the ground and puts a knife to Lev's throat, threatening to kill him if Abby doesn't fight her. So you have a lackluster boss fight with little to no build. Abby bites off 2 of Ellie's fingers, But Ellie gets the upper hand, and as she is about to drown Abby and get her revenge, she just stops and lets Abby go. And that's it. At this point, I'm going to mention that Ellie actually went to the hospital in a flashback and finds out about what Joel did to the Fireflies and confronts him, but it's basically made a non-factor due to Joel's death. Because it would have been amazing having a game revolve around her trying to forgive him and the problems that his actions caused. But no, what we get is Ellie returning home to find Dina gone and the farmhouse empty except for Ellie's workroom. She tries to play Joel's guitar, but can't due to the missing fingers, and she realizes that she's lost her last connection to Joel and walks away, leaving the guitar and Joel behind. This game raised a lot of interesting questions about philosophy, identity, and the consequences of revenge, but unfortunately, it answers none of them, or at least doesn't answer them substantially. And it's a shame, really, because a lot of the plot lines in this game could have made great stories on their own, but instead they're all just tossed in a blender and mixed together. But you know what? In my research, I found an interview with Neil Druckmann in which he stated that the initial plot of The Last of Us Part 2 was going to be a story independent from the first game, which honestly would have been better in my opinion, but that concept was scrapped pretty early in development in favor of the story we got. Who knows, maybe I'll write a separate story of my own as a what-if sequel, but I'll save that for another time. I described the ending of the first game as bittersweet, but the ending of this game is just painfully bitter, just for the sake of being bitter. I mean, overall, as the hours dragged on and I felt my enjoyment slowly diminish, and the only reason I finished this game was so I could just put it on my shelf and forget about it. But hey, Part 2 won Game of the Year, so what do I know?
Goes to The Last of Us Part 2.
They say life will bring discomfort, and I discovered we all just suffer, 'cause no one feels that bad. And it comes from one another, we hurt each other just like a lover, and don't think twice about that.